Winter hides things better than any other season. Snow erases tracks, silence swallows sound, and isolation turns small mistakes into permanent ones. Across America, there are places where people went out into the cold and never truly came back the same. These are not legends or campfire stories. These are real winter horror accounts that still disturb investigators, locals, and those who survived them. And once you hear what happened in these frozen places, the silence will feel very different. Story 1. Last truck on the frozen highway. I still hear that radio sometimes, late at night when the house is silent and the winter wind scrapes against the windows. I hear voices calling out coordinates that lead to nothing but empty snow. It was February when I took the road through northern Montana. I had been driving long haul for 16 years, and I thought I knew every kind of cold the road could throw at me. I was wrong. The cold I found that night was different. It was the kind that gets inside you and never fully leaves. The highway stretched ahead like a gray scar cutting through endless white. The sun had dropped below the horizon hours ago, and the darkness out here was absolute. No streetlights, no other vehicles, just me and the hum of the engine and the snow that fell in thick, silent curtains. The heater in the cab rattled and pushed out weak warmth that barely reached my hands on the wheel. I should have stopped at the last town. I knew that even then, but the schedule was tight, and I had made this mistake before without consequence. I thought I could push through to the next truck stop, maybe 3 hours north. The weather report had mentioned light snow. What I drove into was something else entirely. The flakes grew heavier. Within 20 minutes, visibility dropped to almost nothing. I slowed down, leaning forward, squinting through the windshield as the wipers struggled against the accumulation. The road became harder to see. The white lines disappeared beneath the snow, and I started to rely on instinct more than sight, guessing where the asphalt ended and the shoulder began. That was when the radio changed. I had been listening to a classic rock station out of Billings, the signal faint but steady. Mid-song, it cut out. Static filled the cab, harsh and grating. I reached for the dial, but before I could turn it, a voice came through. It was a man. His words were clipped, urgent, distorted by interference. He was calling out numbers. Coordinates, I realized. Latitude and longitude. Then he said something about an accident, multiple vehicles, and he gave a mile marker. His voice cracked with panic, and then the static swallowed him whole. I sat there, staring at the radio. The classic rock station returned as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was a stray signal, maybe from a trucker on a CB frequency that bled over. It happens, but something about the desperation in that voice unsettled me. I checked my mirrors. Nothing but snow and darkness behind me. The highway felt narrower now, like the forest on either side was pressing in. The trees were just dark shapes, barely visible through the storm. I had not passed another vehicle in over an hour. No headlights in either direction. No signs of life, just the endless white and the low growl of the engine. Then it happened again. The music cut out. Static. Another voice, this time a woman. She was crying, saying she could not feel her legs, asking for help. She repeated a mile marker, her voice growing fainter with each word. I grabbed a pen from the console and scribbled the number on a napkin without thinking. Then the static returned, and the music came back. I checked the mile markers as I passed them. I was still 20 miles from the number she had given. My hands tightened on the wheel. This was not random interference. This was something else. The snow fell harder. The road disappeared completely in places, and I started to worry about going off course, about sliding into the ditch or worse, off some unseen embankment. I slowed to a crawl. The headlights barely penetrated the storm. Everything beyond 10 feet was a swirling void. The radio crackled again. This time, no music returned, just static, and beneath it, faint voices layered over one another, too many to distinguish. They sounded distant, like echoes from somewhere far below. I turned the volume down, but the voices continued, whispering coordinates and mile markers and pleas for help that no one would answer. I reached the mile marker the woman had mentioned. I stopped the truck, letting it idle as I peered out into the storm. There was nothing. No wreckage. No cars. No signs of an accident. Just unbroken snow stretching into the darkness. I sat there for a full minute, scanning the roadside, but the storm made it impossible to see more than a few yards. I convinced myself I was hearing old transmissions, somehow trapped in the air, replaying over and over. It did not make sense, but nothing else did either. I put the truck back in gear and continued north. The next voice came 15 minutes later. A man, older, his words slurred and slow. He described rolling his car, the way the metal crumpled around him, the smell of gasoline. He gave coordinates and a mile marker that I had already passed 10 miles back. He said he could see headlights approaching, said help was coming. Then the static took him. I checked my rearview mirror. No headlights, no one behind me, no one ahead. I was alone. The cold crept deeper into the cab despite the heater. My breath came out in clouds. I cranked the heat higher, but it made no difference. The temperature inside felt like it was dropping, matching the freezing world outside. I rubbed my hands together, trying to keep the circulation going. The radio would not stop now. Every few minutes, another voice, another accident, another set of coordinates. Some of them sobbed, some of them screamed, some of them just whispered, their words too faint to understand. I started to recognize patterns. The same mile markers repeated, the same voices saying the same things over and over. I pulled over again, this time at a mile marker that had been mentioned at least 4 times. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit me like a physical force, stealing the air from my lungs. The wind tore at my jacket, and the snow stung my face. I swept the flashlight across the roadside, looking for anything. Tire tracks, broken glass, metal, blood. There was nothing, just smooth, untouched snow. I climbed back into the cab, shaking from the cold. My hands were numb, and I could barely grip the wheel. The radio continued its broadcast of the dead. I turned it off. The silence that followed was worse. I could hear the wind howling outside, the snow scraping against the truck, and beneath it all, something else. A low, rhythmic sound, almost like breathing. I turned the radio back on. The voices returned, and the other sound faded. I drove for another hour, maybe more. Time became difficult to track. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the road felt endless. I had not seen a single landmark, no signs indicating towns or exits. Just mile markers, appearing briefly in the headlights before vanishing into the storm. The voices on the radio began to change. They stopped giving coordinates. They stopped asking for help. Instead, they started describing where I was. They mentioned the truck, the make and model. They described the storm, the way the snow fell, the darkness pressing in. One voice said my name. I nearly drove off the road. I swerved, corrected, and slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop. I sat there, staring at the radio, my heart pounding. No one should know my name. No one could know I was out here. The voice continued. It was calm, almost soothing. It said I should stop. It said I should get out and walk into the trees. It said the cold would not hurt for long. I ripped the radio out of the dashboard. The wires sparked, and the cab went silent except for the storm. I threw the radio onto the passenger seat and sat there, breathing hard, my hands shaking. The breathing sound returned, slow and steady, coming from somewhere behind me. I looked in the mirror. The sleeper cab was dark. I reached back and pulled the curtain aside. Empty, but the breathing continued. I started driving again. Faster now, pushing the truck as hard as I dared on the invisible road. I needed to find somewhere, anywhere, with light and people. The storm had to break eventually. The highway had to end. It did not. Hours passed. The fuel gauge dropped toward empty. I had enough to make it to the next truck stop. But I had not seen one. I had not seen anything. Just snow and darkness and the endless road. The voices started again, even without the radio. I heard them in the cab, whispering from the vents, from the walls, from the Kong-Chi itself. They repeated coordinates and mile markers. And I realized with growing horror that they were circling back. I had passed the same markers multiple times. I was driving in a loop. I stopped the truck and got out. The cold attacked me immediately, but I ignored it. I stumbled away from the highway, into the trees, my flashlight cutting through the storm. I needed to see something real, something that made sense. I found the wreckage 30 yards into the forest. Cars and trucks, twisted and broken, half buried in snow. Some of them looked decades old, rusted and collapsed. Others were newer, their paint still visible beneath the ice. I counted at least 8 vehicles, maybe more hidden deeper in the trees. There were no bodies, no blood, just empty metal shells, abandoned and silent. I ran back to my truck, slipping in the snow, my lungs burning from the cold. I climbed into the cab and locked the doors, as if that would help. I tried the ignition. The engine turned over but would not start. I tried again. Nothing. The voices grew louder, filling the cab, coming from everywhere at once. They were not asking for help anymore. They were welcoming me. They said I was home now. They said the cold would take me soon, and then I would join them, calling out coordinates into the static, guiding the next driver into the loop. I do not remember how I got out. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Cut Bank, 60 miles south of where I thought I had been. They said a snowplow driver found me walking along the highway, delirious and frostbitten. My truck was never found. They searched the area I described, but there was no wreckage, no loop, no forest full of abandoned vehicles. I have not driven long hauls since. I cannot. Every winter, when the snow falls heavy and the roads disappear, I hear the radio again. I hear the voices calling out their coordinates, and I know somewhere out there, on a frozen highway that does not appear on any map, my truck is still idling in the storm, waiting for the next driver who makes the same mistake I did. The cold never left me. Even now, in the middle of summer, I feel it in my bones. And late at night, when everything is silent, I swear I can hear breathing in the walls. Story 2. Snowed in at mile marker 143. I stopped counting the footprints after midnight, but they never stopped appearing around my car. It happened 3 winters ago on Highway 87, somewhere between Flagstaff and the Wyoming border. I was driving overnight to avoid traffic, pushing through a storm I should have outrun hours earlier. The heater had been dying for the last 50 miles, and when the engine finally quit at mile marker 143, the silence that followed felt wrong. Not peaceful, wrong. I tried the ignition 6 times. Nothing. The snow was falling hard enough that I could barely see 10 feet past the windshield. My phone had no signal. The last town I passed was 40 miles back, and I had not seen another car in over an hour. The cold started seeping in immediately, that bone-deep kind that makes your teeth ache. I kept the doors locked and wrapped myself in the emergency blanket from the trunk. The plan was simple. Wait until morning, then walk back to the main road. People survive situations like this all the time. I just needed to stay calm and stay warm. Around 9 that evening, I noticed the first footprints. They were barely visible through the snow-covered window, but they circled my car in a wide loop, maybe 15 feet out. I told myself they were mine, from when I checked the engine earlier. But I had not walked in a circle. I had gone straight to the hood, straight back to the driver's seat. These prints formed a complete ring around the vehicle. I watched the darkness outside for movement. Nothing, just endless white falling through the beam of my hazard lights. The wind was not strong enough to make much noise, which made everything worse. In a real blizzard, you expect howling. This storm was quiet, muffled, like the air itself was holding its breath. By 10, there were more prints. These ones were closer, maybe 8 feet from the car. They appeared while I was looking away, checking my phone for the 100th time. When I looked up, they were just there, pressed deep into the fresh snow. I could see the tread pattern. Work boots, maybe size 11. Someone had walked another circle around me while I sat inside. I turned off the hazard lights. If someone was out there, I did not want to be visible. The temperature inside the car was dropping fast, my breath forming clouds that stuck to the windows. I could feel the cold working its way through the blanket, through my coat, into my chest. My hands were shaking, but not just from the freezing air. At 11, I heard the crunch. It was faint, rhythmic. Footsteps in snow, slow, deliberate. They moved around the passenger side, then the back, then the driver's side. I pressed myself against the seat and tried to see through the frozen windows, but the ice had turned them opaque. All I could make out were shadows and the dim glow of white. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I waited 10 seconds, 20, a full minute. Nothing moved. No knock, no voice, just presence. Something standing there in the darkness and cold, breathing the same air I was trying to conserve. Then the footsteps resumed, completing their circle, fading back into the storm. When I finally worked up the courage to scrape a hole in the ice on my window, I saw the new tracks. They were inches from the car now, close enough that whoever made them could have reached out and touched the glass. But that was not the disturbing part. The disturbing part was that they came from nowhere. I could see where they circled the car, clear as day in the snow. But there was no trail leading to them. No path showing where this person had come from or where they had gone. The prints just started, made their loop, and ended. Like someone had been dropped from the sky, walked around me, and vanished. I did not sleep. I could not. Every 20 minutes, I would scrape a new hole in the ice and look outside, and every time there were more prints. Dozens of them now, layered on top of each other, some crossing, some parallel. all circling, all close. The snow kept falling, but it never filled them in completely. They stayed visible, dark impressions that should not have been there. Around 2 a.m, the car started rocking. It was gentle at first, like someone was testing the weight, pushing on the bumper. Then harder, the whole frame swayed side to side, metal creaking, snow sliding off the roof in sheets. I braced myself against the steering wheel and stared into the darkness beyond the windshield, looking for shapes, for movement, for anything that would explain what was happening. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the rocking. I could hear my own heartbeat, too fast, too loud. My breath was coming in short gasps, fogging up the small clear spot I had made in the window. Outside, the footprints had multiplied. There were hundreds now, maybe thousands, packed so tight they formed a solid ring of compressed snow. No blank spaces, no gaps, just an unbroken circle of tracks, like an army had been marching around my car all night. I thought about running. The main road was not that far. I could follow my own tire tracks back, move fast, get warm. But when I looked at the path behind me, I saw more prints. They crossed the road in both directions, blocking the way I had come, blocking the way forward. Every route was covered in those same tracks, those same deliberate, impossible circles. At 4 a.m, the knocking started. Not on the windows, not on the doors, underneath the car. Something was tapping on the undercarriage, slow and rhythmic, metal on metal. I pulled my feet up onto the seat and listened as the sound moved from the back axle to the front, then side to side, then back again. It was methodical, like someone was inspecting the vehicle, checking every inch. Then I heard the scraping. It started under the driver, his side door, a long, drawn-out sound like nails on steel. It moved along the bottom edge of the car, scratching, testing, searching. My legs were shaking so hard I had to hold them still with my hands. The scraping reached the front tire, paused, then continued around to the passenger side. Whatever was under my car was taking its time. The scratching stopped near the gas tank. I heard a different sound then, something wet and heavy, like breathing. Not human breathing, too slow, too deep. It rattled in a way that made my skin crawl, each exhale lasting 5 or 6 seconds, followed by a long inhale that sounded like wind through a tunnel. I wanted to scream, but I kept my hand over my mouth, terrified that any sound would draw it closer. The breathing moved. I could track it by the condensation it left on the frozen underside of the car. Small clouds of warmth that briefly appeared and faded near the exhaust pipe, then the rear wheel, then the back door. It was working its way around, same as the footsteps, same as the scratching. Circling, always circling. At dawn, the storm cleared. The sun came up pale and cold, turning the landscape into a blinding sheet of white. I could finally see the road, the trees, the mile marker half buried in a drift. Everything looked normal, peaceful, even, except for the footprints. They were everywhere, hundreds of overlapping circles, all centered on my car. In the daylight, I could see how deep they were, pressed down through 4 inches of fresh snow into the frozen dirt below. But there was still no trail, no path leading in or out, just circles upon circles, like something had been orbiting me all night without ever arriving or leaving. I got out of the car. The cold hit me instantly, so sharp it felt like glass in my lungs. My legs barely worked after sitting cramped for so long, and I had to lean against the door to keep from falling. I looked at the ground near my feet and saw the prints up close. They were boot prints, unmistakably human, tread patterns, heel marks, size and shape exactly what you would expect from a person walking through snow. But when I knelt down to touch one, my hand went through it. The print was not an impression. It was a hole. The snow around it was solid, packed tight, but where the footprint should have been there was nothing. Empty space. I could see dirt at the bottom, frozen and dark, like something had burned through the snow without disturbing what was around it. I checked another print, same thing, and another. Every single one was a void, a gap, something removed rather than pressed down. I got back in the car and locked the doors. A truck found me around 9 that morning. The driver was an older man hauling equipment to a worksite up north. He helped me jumpstart the engine and followed me to the nearest town, 20 miles west. I did not tell him about the footprints. I did not mention the knocking or the breathing or the scraping. I just thanked him and drove straight to a motel where I could lock the door and turn the heat up until I stopped shaking. I went back 3 weeks later. I did not know why. Maybe I needed to prove it was real, that I had not imagined the whole thing in some hypothermia-induced panic. The mile marker was easy to find. The snow had melted by then, leaving the ground bare and muddy. I parked in the exact same spot and walked the area for an hour. There were no footprints, no marks in the dirt, no sign that anything had happened there at all. But when I checked under my car, I found the scratches. Long, deep gouges in the metal, running along the undercarriage in parallel lines. 4 on each side. They were fresh, bright steel showing through the rust and road grime. Something had clawed at my car that night, something with enough strength to score metal. I sold the car a month later. I could not drive it anymore. Every time I got behind the wheel, I would think about those circles, those impossible tracks that came from nowhere. I would hear the breathing, feel the rocking, remember the weight of something standing just outside my door in the freezing darkness. I take different routes now. I avoid night driving. I check the weather obsessively before any trip longer than an hour. But sometimes, in parking lots or rest stops, I will walk back to my car and notice footprints in the snow around it. Just a few, never a full circle, but always there, pressed deep, with no trail showing where they came from. And I wonder if whatever was at mile marker 143 is still circling, still looking, still waiting for the next storm to trap someone alone in the cold and silence where no one can hear them realize that they are not the only thing trying to survive the night. Cold highways share a strange pattern. The farther they stretch into empty land, the more they seem to disconnect people from the rest of the world. Breakdowns, wrong turns, missed signals. None of it feels accidental once the snow starts falling. And further ahead, the isolation only deepens. Story 3. Voices beneath the frozen lake. The ice was singing my thoughts back to me, and I knew I should have left the moment I realized it, but by then the sun was already gone and the darkness had swallowed the shore. I went out to Lake Superior in mid-January, to a spot about 2 miles from the nearest access point. The ice was thick that year, over 20 inches in most places, solid enough to drive a truck across. I had been ice fishing these waters for 30 years, and I thought I understood the lake. I thought I knew its moods, its dangers, its silence. I was wrong about the silence. The morning started normal. I dragged my sled across the frozen expanse, my boots crunching on the snow-covered surface. The sky was gray and heavy, threatening more snow, but the wind was calm. I could see my breath hanging in the air, and the cold bit at my face even through my heavy gear. I was alone out there. No other fishermen, no one on the ice at all. Just me and the vast white emptiness stretching in every direction. I drilled my holes in a cluster, 3 of them, each one breaking through with that satisfying crack and hiss as the auger bit through the final layer. The water beneath was black and still. I set up my shelter, a small pop-up tent that barely blocked the wind, and settled in with my lines and my thermos of coffee. The heater inside the tent glowed orange, pushing back the cold just enough to keep my hands from going numb. The first hour passed without incident. I caught 2 perch, small ones, and threw them back. The only sounds were the occasional groan of the ice shifting beneath me and the wind picking up outside the tent. These were normal sounds, familiar sounds. I had heard them 1,000 times before. Then I heard something else. It came from below, from somewhere deep beneath the ice, a low vibration, almost like a hum, that I felt more than heard. It made the water in my fishing hole ripple slightly, concentric circles spreading outward. I leaned forward, watching the surface, waiting for it to happen again. It did. The vibration came again, stronger this time, and with it came a sound. Not quite a voice, but close. It was like someone speaking underwater, the words muffled and distorted but still recognizable as language. I could not make out what it was saying. I told myself it was the ice. Ice makes strange sounds when it shifts and settles. It can sound like thunder, like groaning metal, even like voices if you let your imagination run. I had heard it before. This was different, but I tried to convince myself it was not. I went back to fishing. The line sat slack in the water, no bites, no movement. The sound beneath the ice continued, coming in waves every few minutes. Each time it happened, the water rippled. Each time, it sounded more like a voice. I pulled up my line and leaned over the hole, pressing my ear close to the surface. The cold radiating from the water stung my face, but I ignored it. I needed to hear what was down there. The voice came again. This time, I understood a word. Just one. My name. I jerked back, my heart hammering. I stared at the hole, at the black water reflecting the dim light from the heater. Nobody knew I was out here. I had not told anyone where I was going. It was just a day trip. Nothing unusual, nothing worth mentioning. There was no reason for anyone to be calling my name from beneath the ice. I grabbed my phone to check for messages, maybe someone trying to reach me, but there was no signal. There never was out here. I was too far from shore, too isolated. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and tried to focus. The voice came again, clearer now. It said my name twice, slowly, deliberately. The tone was flat, emotionless, like someone reading from a script. I recognized something in it, something that made my skin crawl. It sounded like me, not exactly, but close enough, like a recording of my own voice played back through water. I stood up and unzipped the tent, stepping out into the cold. The wind had picked up, and the temperature had dropped. The sky was darker now, the gray turning to charcoal. I checked my watch. It was only 2 in the afternoon, but it felt later. The light was fading faster than it should. I walked to the other holes I had drilled and listened. The sound was coming from all of them. The same voice, the same words, echoing up through the ice. My name, over and over, with long pauses in between. I covered one hole with my boot, but the sound continued from the others, uninterrupted. I decided to leave. This was wrong, all of it, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to get off the ice. I started packing up my gear, moving quickly, my hands shaking from more than just the cold. I collapsed the tent and strapped it to the sled, grabbed my auger and my bucket, and started walking back toward shore. That was when I realized I could not see the shore anymore. The storm had moved in fast, faster than any storm I had ever seen on this lake. The snow fell in thick sheets, and the wind howled across the ice, whipping the flakes into a blinding wall of white. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. I pulled out my compass, but the needle spun lazily, refusing to settle on any direction. I tapped it, shook it, but it just kept spinning. I tried to retrace my steps, following my boot prints back the way I had come, but the wind had already erased them. The snow covered everything, smooth and unbroken. I was lost on a frozen lake I had fished for 3 decades. The voice followed me. It came up through the ice wherever I walked, tracking my movements. It stopped saying my name and started saying other things. My thoughts. Things I had been thinking just moments before. When I thought about heading east, the voice said east. When I thought about the storm, the voice described the storm in my own words, my own cadence. It was inside my head, pulling out my thoughts and reflecting them back at me through the ice. I started running. The sled dragged behind me, bouncing and scraping, but I did not care. I just needed to get away from the voice, away from the ice. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would collapse, and then I stopped, gasping for air. The voice was still there. It had not faded. It was louder now, coming from directly beneath my feet. I looked down and saw a crack in the ice, thin and dark, running between my boots. It had not been there a moment ago. The crack spread. I heard it before I saw it, that sharp splitting sound like a gunshot. The ice beneath me shifted, and I stumbled backward, dragging the sled with me. The crack widened, branching out in multiple directions, creating a web of fractures that stretched into the storm. I moved away from it, walking carefully now, testing each step before putting my full weight down. The ice groaned beneath me, a deep rumbling that I felt in my chest. The voice spoke again, but this time it was not repeating my thoughts. It was counting down. 10, 9, 8. I did not wait to hear what happened at 0. I started moving again, faster, ignoring the pain in my legs and the burning in my lungs. The countdown continued, the voice calm and measured, coming from everywhere at once. 7, 6, 5. The ice gave way at 3. I dropped into the black water, the cold hitting me like a fist. It drove the air from my lungs and locked my muscles in place. I went under, the weight of my gear dragging me down, and for a moment I thought I would drown right there, frozen and helpless beneath the surface. But my hand found the edge of the ice, and I pulled myself up, kicking and clawing until I broke through into the air. I gasped, sucking in a breath that felt like knives in my chest. My fingers were already going numb, and I could barely feel the ice as I dragged myself out of the water. I lay there on my stomach, shaking violently, my clothes freezing solid against my skin. The voice was louder now, no longer muffled by the ice. It surrounded me, echoing across the frozen lake. It said I should rest. It said the cold would take me soon, and then I would be beneath the ice with all the others, and I would finally understand. I forced myself to stand. My legs barely supported me, and I could feel the hypothermia setting in, the confusion and the drowsiness creeping through my mind. I knew I had minutes at best before I lost the ability to move. I saw a light, just a faint glow through the storm, maybe 100 yards away. I staggered toward it, leaving the sled behind, leaving everything behind. The light grew brighter as I got closer, and I realized it was a building. A small ice fishing shack, old and weathered, sitting alone on the ice. The door was unlocked. I pushed inside and collapsed onto the floor. There was no heater, no supplies, nothing but 4 wooden walls and a hole in the floor where someone had been fishing. But it blocked the wind, and that was enough. I do not know how long I lay there. The cold had me, and I drifted in and out of consciousness. I heard the voice the entire time, coming up through the fishing hole, speaking in my voice, saying things I had never said, describing places I had never been. It talked about the others beneath the ice, the ones who had fallen through, the ones who had drowned or frozen. It said they were waiting. It said I would join them soon. I woke up in a hospital in Duluth. A snowmobiler had found me the next morning, unconscious in that shack, suffering from severe hypothermia and frostbite. They said I was lucky. They said another hour and I would have been dead. I lost 3 fingers on my left hand and 2 toes on my right foot. The doctor said it could have been worse. They asked me what I was doing out there in that storm, why I did not turn back when the weather changed. I did not tell them about the voice. I did not tell them what I heard beneath the ice. I have not been back to that lake. I will never go back. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent and the winter wind rattles the windows, I hear it again. That voice, my voice, calling from somewhere far below. It knows my thoughts before I think them. It knows what I will say before I speak. And it is still counting down. Story 4. Cabin that was not on the map. I still check my rearview mirror at night, even when I am parked in my own driveway with the doors locked and the porch light on. It has been 3 years since that February, and I have never driven through Montana again. I will not. Some places are not meant to be found, and some doors should never be opened, even when you are freezing to death. I was driving across the northern edge of Montana in the middle of winter because I thought I could save time. I was moving from Seattle to Chicago for a job that does not exist anymore, and I wanted to avoid the interstate traffic through Idaho and Wyoming. The GPS showed a state highway that cut straight across, and I figured it would be faster, quieter, maybe even scenic. I was wrong about all of it. The snow started just after noon, light flakes at first, drifting across the windshield like dust. Within an hour, it was coming down so hard I could barely see the road. The highway was empty. No other cars, no signs, just white on white on white. The heater in my truck was struggling, and my phone had lost signal somewhere back near the last town. A place so small I cannot even remember its name now. I should have turned around. I know that. But the idea of backtracking 40 miles through worsening snow felt more dangerous than pushing forward. I thought I could make it to the next town before dark. I thought wrong. By 3 in the afternoon, the sky was the color of old concrete, and the wind was shaking my truck so hard I had to grip the steering wheel with both hands just to stay on the road. The temperature outside had dropped to something brutal, single digits, maybe lower. My fuel gauge was sitting just above empty, and I had not seen a gas station in over an hour. That was when the fear started. Not panic yet, but the slow creeping realization that I had made a terrible mistake. I was alone on a road that might not be plowed for days. No cell service, no other drivers, no plan. The blizzard swallowed everything. I could not see more than 10 feet ahead. The road disappeared under the snow, and I was just guessing where the lanes were, following the faint shadows of what might have been tire tracks or might have been nothing at all. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the effort of keeping the truck steady. The wind howled against the metal like something alive and angry. I do not know how long I drove like that. Time stopped meaning anything. It could have been 20 minutes or 2 hours. The world outside was just whiteness and noise and cold. My mind started playing tricks on me. I thought I saw shapes moving in the snow. Dark figures standing just off the road, watching. When I blinked, they were gone, but the feeling of being watched stayed. Then the engine sputtered, once, twice, and died. I coasted for maybe 30 feet before the truck stopped completely. I sat there in the silence, listening to the wind scream outside, and I felt something I had never felt before. True fear, the kind that makes your chest tight and your thoughts scatter. I was out of gas in the middle of a blizzard with no way to call for help and no idea where I was. I tried the ignition 3 times. Nothing. The cab was already getting colder. I could see my breath. I had a winter coat and gloves, but I knew that would not be enough if I had to spend the night out here. Hypothermia does not take long in these conditions. I had maybe a few hours before I started making mistakes, before my body started shutting down. I pulled out my phone, even though I knew it was useless. No signal, no GPS. The screen showed my last known location as somewhere near the Canadian border, but the map was blank. Just a blue dot in the middle of nothing. That was when I saw it, through the snow, barely visible, maybe 100 yards off the road. A structure, dark wood, low roof, covered in snow, a cabin. I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself it was real. It did not make sense. There were no other buildings out here. No driveways, no mailboxes, just empty frozen land stretching in every direction. But I could see it. Solid. Real. A cabin sitting alone in the storm. I did not think. I just moved. I grabbed my coat, pulled up my hood, and stepped out into the blizzard. The cold hit me like a punch. The wind was so strong it almost knocked me over. Snow stunned my face and got into my eyes, my nose, my mouth. I could barely breathe. I put my head down and started walking toward the cabin, each step sinking deep into the snow. My legs burned. My lungs burned. The distance that looked like 100 yards felt like a mile. I kept my eyes on the cabin. It did not disappear. It stayed there, waiting. When I finally reached it, I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. The cabin was old. The wood was dark and weathered, and the windows were covered with frost so thick I could not see inside. There was no smoke coming from the chimney. No lights. No tracks in the snow around it. It looked abandoned. I climbed the steps to the front door and knocked. The sound was swallowed by the wind. I waited, breath clouding in front of my face, and knocked again. Nothing. I tried the handle. It turned. The door opened, and I stepped inside. The silence hit me first. The wind stopped. The noise of the storm vanished like someone had flipped a switch. I stood in the doorway, snow falling off my coat onto the floor, and just listened. Nothing. No creaking. No settling. Just silence so thick it felt wrong. The cabin was a single room. Small. Dark. There was a wood stove in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, a narrow cot against the wall. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but it did not look abandoned. It looked paused, like someone had just stepped out and planned to come back. I closed the door behind me. The warmth was immediate, not from the stove, which was cold and empty, but from the air itself. The cabin was warm, warmer than it should have been. I pulled off my gloves and touched the wall. It was not just warm. It was hot. That should have scared me. It should have sent me back out into the storm. But I was freezing and exhausted, and the warmth felt so good I did not care. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Underground heating, insulation, something. I sat down at the table and tried to think. I needed a plan. I could wait out the storm here, then hike back to my truck in the morning and figure out how to get gas. Someone would drive by eventually. Someone would help. That was when I noticed the map. It was spread out on the table, corners held down by small stones. An old paper map, the kind you used to buy at gas stations. It showed Montana, but it was marked up. Red lines crisscrossed the state, connecting towns and highways in patterns that did not match any roads I knew. Some of the lines went off the edge of the map and did nothing. And in the center, circled in black ink, was a spot labeled only with a single word. Here. I leaned closer. The circle was right where I was, or where I thought I was. But when I looked at the roads around it, none of them matched the highway I had been driving on. There were no towns nearby. No landmarks, just empty space. I pulled out my phone and opened the map app, even though I knew it would not work. It did not, but when I zoomed in on my last known location, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was no cabin, not on the satellite image, not on the map. The spot where I was sitting showed nothing but flat snow-covered land. I zoomed in further. Nothing. I switched to terrain view. Nothing. I even checked the historical images. Going back years. Every single one showed the same thing. Empty land. No cabin. No structure. No sign that anything had ever been here. I looked around the room. Everything was still there. The table. The chairs. The cot. The stove. Solid. Real. I could touch it. I could feel it. But according to every map, every satellite image, this place did not exist. I stood up and walked to the window. I wiped the frost away with my sleeve and looked outside. The storm was still raging. Snow piled against the glass. But beyond it, I could see my truck. A dark shape buried in white, barely visible. It was real. It was still there. I turned back to the room. And that was when I saw the photographs. They were pinned to the wall above the cot. Dozens of them. Polaroids, faded and yellowed with age. I stepped closer and felt something cold crawl up my spine. They were all of people. Different people. Men, women, all ages. Standing in front of the cabin. Some were smiling. Some were not. But every single one of them looked wrong. Their eyes were too wide. Their expressions too stiff, like they were posing for a picture they did not want to take. And behind every person, barely visible in the background, was a shadow. The same shadow. Tall, thin, standing just out of focus near the tree line. I tore my eyes away and back toward the door. My heart was pounding. I needed to leave. I needed to get out. Storm or no storm, I could not stay here. But when I turned to the door, it would not open. I pulled the handle. Nothing. I pulled harder. It did not move. I slammed my shoulder against it, and it felt like hitting concrete. The door was sealed, locked from the outside, or from something else. I spun around, breathing hard. And that was when I noticed the silence again. Not just quiet, total silence. No wind, no storm. I pressed my ear against the door and heard nothing. Like the outside world had stopped existing. I backed away and looked at the window. The frost was spreading, creeping across the glass in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Almost like fingers. I grabbed one of the chairs and swung it at the window. It bounced off like I had hit rubber. I tried again. Same result. The glass did not crack. Did not even scratch. I was trapped. I do not know how long I stood there, trying to think. Trying to breathe. Trying not to panic. Minutes. Hours. Time felt wrong. The warmth in the room was getting worse. Not comfortable anymore. Oppressive. Suffocating. My skin was damp with sweat, and my head was starting to ache. I sat down on the cot and forced myself to think. There had to be a way out. There had to be an explanation. Cabins do not just appear. Doors do not seal themselves. This was not real. It could not be real. But the photographs on the wall were real. And the map was real. And the warmth pressing down on me was real. I looked at the stove. It was still cold. I touched it. Freezing. But the air around me was sweltering. I walked to the far corner of the room, and the temperature shifted. Colder there. I moved back toward the center. Warmer, like the heat was radiating from a single spot. I looked down. There was a seam in the floor. Thin, almost invisible, running in a perfect square around the area where I was standing. I knelt down and ran my fingers along it. It was a trapdoor. I found the edge had pulled. It opened easily, too easily, and underneath was darkness. Not shadow, not the absence of light. Pure darkness, the kind that does not reflect anything. That swallows everything. And from that darkness came warmth. Thick, wet, like breath. I dropped the door and scrambled back. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely control them. Something was down there. Something alive. I heard it then. Not a sound, not a voice, but something deeper. A vibration. A hum. It came from below the floor, from the walls, from the air itself. It was not language, but I understood it. Not in words, in feeling. It wanted me to go down. I looked at the door. Still sealed. The window, still frozen shut. The only way out was down. I stood at the edge of the trapdoor and looked into the darkness. I could not see the bottom. I could not see anything. But the hum was louder now, wrapping around me, pulling at something inside my chest. And I realized something that made my blood turn to ice. I had been here before. Not this cabin, not this moment, but this feeling. This exact sensation of being trapped and watched and pulled toward something I could not name. I had felt it once before. Years ago, in a dream I had forgotten until now. A dream where I walked into darkness and never came back out. I do not remember making the choice. I just remember lowering myself into the hole. The walls were dirt, rough, cold. My hands scraped against stone and roots as I climbed down. The darkness swallowed the light from above until I could not see anything. Not my hands, not the walls, nothing. I reached the bottom. The ground was soft. Not dirt, something else. Something that shifted under my weight. I stood there in the dark, and I felt it. Not saw it, not heard it, felt it, a presence, massive, ancient, watching me from inches away. And then the hum stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I could hear my own heartbeat, my own breathing, nothing else. I reached out into the dark, and my hand touched something. Fabric, old, rough. I pulled my hand back, but it was too late. The thing moved. I do not know how I got out. I do not remember climbing. I do not remember opening the trapdoor. I just remember waking up outside in the snow, face down, freezing. The cabin was gone, not abandoned, not collapsed, gone. The space where it had been was just snow, flat, untouched. I crawled back to my truck. The keys were still in the ignition. The engine started on the first try. The fuel gauge showed half a tank. It had been empty. I know it had been empty. I drove. I did not stop until I hit the first town. I filled the tank, bought coffee, and sat in the parking lot shaking until the sun came up. I never told anyone. Who would believe me? But I looked. I spent months searching satellite images, maps, old records. I even hired someone to drive that stretch of highway and search the area. They found nothing. No cabin, no foundation, no sign that anything had ever been there. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that somewhere in northern Montana, in a place that does not exist on any map, there is a cabin. And it is waiting, not for me, for the next person who gets lost. The next person who needs shelter. The next person who opens the trapdoor and climbs down into the dark. I still have the map, the one from the table. I took it with me without realizing it. It was in my coat pocket when I got home. The red lines are still there. The circle marked here is still there. But now there is something else. A new mark, small, barely visible, a single red dot drawn in the corner of the map. And it is labeled with my name. In winter, shelter does not always mean safety. Cabins, frozen lakes, quiet structures, they hold on to what happens inside them. The cold preserves more than bodies. It preserves moments that were never meant to be witnessed. And somewhere else, the same conditions were already forming again. Story 5. Motel that closed every winter. The room key had rust on it that looked like dried blood, and the number 17 was barely visible under years of fingerprints and grime. I found the Pine Ridge Motel off Route 41 in northern Montana during the worst blizzard I had driven through in my life. It was late February, well past the season when most places up there shut down for winter. My GPS had stopped working 20 miles back, and my phone had no signal. The snow was coming down so hard that I almost missed the turnoff. Just a dim blue sign half buried in a drift that said vacancy in letters that flickered like they were trying to die. The parking lot had 3 other cars in it, all of them covered in so much snow they looked like they had been there for weeks. The motel itself was a long, single-story building painted yellow once upon a time, now faded to the color of old bruises. 12 rooms facing the lot, windows dark except for 2 at the far end. The office light was on, barely, casting a sick orange glow across the ice. I went inside because I had no other choice. The next town was 40 miles away and the roads were getting worse by the minute. The office smelled like mildew and cigarettes, with a space heater in the corner that rattled but put out almost no warmth. The woman behind the counter was maybe 60, thin in a way that looked unhealthy, with gray hair pulled back so tight it made her face look stretched. She did not look up when I walked in. I asked if she had a room available. She slid a registration card across the counter without speaking, her fingers yellow at the tips, nails bitten down to nothing. I filled it out while she watched the small television on the desk, some old western with the sound turned so low I could barely hear it. When I handed the card back, she finally looked at me. Her eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they stayed on my face just a second too long. She gave me the key to room 17 and told me checkout was at 10. Then she said something that made my skin crawl. She said the motel closed for winter every year, and I was lucky I got here when I did. One more day and the place would have been empty. I asked why she stayed open this late into the season. She said some people had nowhere else to go, and those were the ones who needed it most. I took the key and went back into the cold. Room 17 was at the end of the building, second to last before the corner. The door stuck when I tried to open it, swollen from moisture, and I had to put my shoulder into it before it gave way. Inside was exactly what you would expect from a $40 a night motel in the middle of nowhere. One bed with a floral comforter that had been washed thin, a dresser with a mirror, a bathroom with a shower curtain that had brown stains along the bottom edge. The carpet was dark green and worn through in spots, showing the concrete underneath. The heater worked, barely. I turned it up as high as it would go and sat on the bed, listening to it clank and wheeze. The room was freezing, cold enough that I could see my breath. I kept my coat on and tried to warm my hands under the thin stream of hot air coming from the vent. That was when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, like something rotting in the walls. Old food, maybe, or a dead animal trapped in the insulation. But the longer I sat there, the stronger it got, sweet and sick, the kind of smell that sticks in your throat and makes you want to gag. I checked the trash can, the closet, under the bed. Nothing. The smell was just there, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I thought about asking for a different room, but when I looked outside, the office light was off. The whole building was dark except for my room and one other, 3 doors down. I could see the glow of a television through the curtains, blue and flickering. Whoever was in that room had not come out since I arrived. I decided to wait until morning. I locked the door, checked it twice, and tried to sleep. Around midnight, I heard the knocking. It was not on my door. It was coming from the room next to mine, room 18. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then 3 more. I lay there in the dark and listened as it repeated. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock, knock. It went on for maybe 5 minutes before it stopped. Then I heard the footsteps. They were in the hallway, slow and uneven, like someone dragging one leg. They passed my door, stopped, then continued toward the office. I got up and looked through the peephole, but the hallway was too dark to see anything. The footsteps faded, and then there was silence again. I got back in bed, but I could not sleep. The smell was worse now, so thick I could taste it. I opened the window a crack to let in some air, and that was when I saw the rooms. 4 of them, starting with room 7 and going to room 10, had no tire tracks leading to them. The snow in front of those doors was smooth and untouched, but the curtains were drawn and I could see faint light coming from inside. Not electric light, something dimmer, like candles. I watched for movement, for shadows, for anything that would tell me someone was in there. But the windows stayed still. I closed the window and sat in the chair by the heater, staring at the door. The fear had settled into my chest now. That tight, cold feeling you get when you know something is wrong, but you cannot explain why. Every sound made me jump. The wind against the glass, the heater clicking on and off, the building settling under the weight of the snow. At 2 in the morning, I heard someone in the bathroom. Not my bathroom, the one next door, in room 18. I could hear water running, the pipes groaning, then a low sound that might have been crying. It went on for a long time, rising and falling, never quite loud enough to be clear. Then it stopped, and I heard the knocking again. 3 slow knocks, pause. 3 more. This time, it was on my wall. I stood up and backed away from the sound, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. The knocking moved, following me, staying right where I was standing. When I moved to the left, it shifted. When I moved to the right, it followed, like something on the other side of the wall was tracking me, keeping pace, staying close. I grabbed my keys and went for the door. I was done. I would sleep in my car if I had to, even in the freezing cold. But when I tried to unlock the deadbolt, it would not turn. The metal was stiff, frozen maybe, or rusted through. I yanked on the handle and pulled with both hands, but the door would not budge. It was like it had been sealed shut from the outside. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and too fast. The smell was overwhelming now, filling the room like smoke. I turned on every light, checked the windows again, tried the door one more time. Nothing worked. I was locked in. That was when I noticed the closet door was open. I had checked it earlier. I was sure I had. But now it was cracked a few inches, just enough to show darkness inside. I walked over slowly, every instinct screaming at me to stay away, but I had to know. I pulled the door open and looked inside. There was a suitcase on the floor. Old, brown leather, the kind people used decades ago. It was not mine. I had never seen it before. But it was sitting there like it had always been there, covered in dust and cobwebs, the latches corroded green. I reached down and touched it. The leather was ice cold. I should have left it alone. I should have just backed away and waited for morning. But I opened it anyway, my hands shaking so bad I could barely work the latches. Inside were clothes, a woman's clothes, folded neatly, a blue dress, a cardigan, a pair of shoes. Underneath was a stack of photographs, old Polaroids with the colors faded almost white. I picked up the top one and held it under the light. It was this room, room 17, same bed, same mirror, same green carpet. But there was someone sitting on the bed, a woman, maybe in her 30s, thin and pale, staring directly at the camera. Her eyes were wrong, too wide, too empty, and behind her, in the mirror, I could see someone else standing in the doorway. A shadow, tall and featureless, watching her. I dropped the photo and stumbled back. The closet door swung shut on its own, slow and deliberate, the hinges creaking. I heard the knocking again, but this time it was coming from inside the closet. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. Then the lights went out. The darkness was total. Suffocating. I could not see my own hands in front of my face. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. And that was when I saw her. She was standing in the corner by the bathroom, exactly where the shadow had been in the photograph. Same dress, same empty eyes. She was not moving, just standing there, staring at me with her head tilted slightly to one side. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. I ran for the door and pulled with everything I had. The deadbolt turned this time, the lock clicking open, and I burst into the hallway. The cold air hit me like a slap, and I ran toward the parking lot without looking back. But when I got outside, my car was gone. The parking space was empty, just smooth snow where I had parked 3 hours ago. The other 3 cars were still there, still buried, but mine had vanished. I spun around, looking for tire tracks, for any sign of where it had gone, but there was nothing. Just untouched snow, glowing pale under the dim light from my room. I looked back at the building and saw the woman in the window of room 17. She was standing behind the curtain, barely visible, her hand pressed against the glass. And next to her, in room 18, I saw another figure. And another in room 16. And another in room 15. All of them standing in the windows. All of them watching me. The office light came on. I could see the woman from the front desk standing in the doorway. That same empty expression on her face. She raised one hand and pointed toward the row of dark rooms, the ones with no tire tracks. The ones with the candlelight. Then she turned and went inside, and the office light went out. I walked back to the highway. It took me 4 hours through knee-deep snow, in the dark, with the wind cutting through my coat like knives. A trucker picked me up just after dawn and drove me to the nearest town. I told him I had car trouble and left it at that. I called the police 2 days later and told them about the motel. They said the Pine Ridge had been closed for 15 years. The owner died in the early 2000s and the property had been abandoned ever since. When I insisted I had stayed there, they sent a deputy out to check. He called me back that afternoon and said the building was still standing, but it was empty. No power, no heat, no cars in the lot, just a gutted shell that had not been used in over a decade. But he found something in room 17, a suitcase, old brown leather, covered in dust. Inside were clothes, photographs, and a registration card with my name on it, dated the same night I stayed there. The deputy asked if I wanted to file a report. I said no. I moved south that spring. I do not drive through Montana anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I think about those rooms. The ones with the candlelight. The ones with no tire tracks leading to them. And I wonder how many people are still there, standing in the windows, waiting for the next person who has nowhere else to go. Story 6. Blizzard that trapped the town. The snow had been gone for 3 days when I found Mrs. Henderson sitting in her living room chair, frozen solid, her eyes still open and staring at the television that had not worked in weeks. I was the mail carrier for Whitmore, a town of 400 people tucked into the mountains of northern Idaho. When the blizzard hit in late January, nobody thought much of it at first. We were used to harsh winters. We had generators, snowplows, stockpiles of food, and firewood. We thought we could wait it out like we always did. But this storm was different. It did not stop. It just kept coming, day after day, until the snow was piled so high against the buildings that you could not see the first floor windows anymore. The power went out on day 3. The phone lines went down on day 5. By day 7, the roads were completely impassable, buried under 15 feet of snow that the plows could not touch. The wind was so strong it knocked grown men off their feet. The temperature dropped to 30 below zero, then 40, then 50. We were cut off from everything. No communication, no help coming, just the town and the storm and the darkness that came early every afternoon and did not leave until late morning. I tried to check on people those first 2 weeks. I made it to maybe a dozen houses, the ones closest to my own place on Maple Street. Everyone seemed fine, cold, scared, running low on supplies, but fine. They said they would make it through. They said help would come soon. I believed them because I had to. The storm lasted 23 days. When it finally stopped, the silence was terrifying. No wind, no snow falling, just absolute quiet and a blue sky that seemed wrong after so many days of gray. The sun came out, bright and harsh against all that white, and we started to dig ourselves out. That was when we realized something was very wrong. Old Man Tucker did not answer his door. I knocked for 5 minutes, calling his name, but there was nothing. I broke a window and climbed inside. The house was freezing, colder inside than outside somehow. I found him in his bed, wrapped in every blanket he owned, his face gray and peaceful. The coroner later said he had been dead for at least 2 weeks. He had frozen to death in his sleep when his generator ran out of fuel. Mrs. Henderson was next. I found her 3 hours later, doing my rounds, checking on the people I had not been able to reach during the storm. She was in her chair, exactly as I described, her body rigid and covered in a thin layer of frost. The television remote was still in her hand. She had been alone. Nobody had checked on her. Nobody had known. By the end of that first day, we had found 6 bodies. By the end of the week, the number was up to 23. Almost all of them elderly, living alone, too proud or too scared to ask for help. They had frozen to death in their homes while the rest of us huddled in our own houses, waiting for the storm to end. But that was not the disturbing part. The disturbing part came later, when we started to notice the inconsistencies. The Johnsons lived on Birch Street, a young couple in their 30s. I had seen them 2 days before the storm hit, waving from their porch as I delivered their mail. When we finally reached their house after the snow melted enough to clear the roads, we found them in their kitchen. They had been dead for weeks, just like the others, but their front door was unlocked. Their car was in the driveway, buried but intact, and on their kitchen table, there was a note. The note said they were leaving. It said they were going to try to make it to the main highway to flag down help. It was dated day 9 of the storm, but their bodies were in the kitchen, not outside. They had not left. They had written the note, and then they had sat down at the table and died right there, together, holding hands. Nobody could explain it. The coroner said they had died from hypothermia and starvation. But that did not make sense. Their pantry was full. They had food. They had water. They had a fireplace with wood stacked beside it. Why would they starve? Why would they freeze when they had everything they needed to survive? More notes started turning up. The Millers had one, saying they were going to walk to the church in the center of town to wait with others. But they died in their living room, curled up together on the couch. The Baxters had a note saying they heard someone calling for help outside and were going to investigate. They died in their hallway, 5 feet from their front door, as if they had been trying to get back inside but could not remember how to turn the doorknob. I found a note in my own mailbag, tucked between 2 envelopes I had been carrying since before the storm. It was in my handwriting. It said I needed to check on Mrs. Henderson immediately, that she was in danger. I did not remember writing it. I had no reason to single her out. But there it was, dated 3 days before I found her body, written in my own hand. The town started to fall apart after that. People stopped trusting each other. They said the storm had done something to us, made us do things we did not remember, made us forget what we had written or said or done. Some people claimed they had left their houses during the storm, that they had walked through the streets in the freezing darkness, but they could not remember why or where they had gone. Others said they had heard voices calling them outside, familiar voices, voices of neighbors and friends begging for help. I started having the dreams around then. I would see myself walking through the storm, the wind tearing at my coat, the snow blinding me. I would be making my rounds, going from house to house, knocking on doors. But in the dreams, nobody answered. I would open the doors anyway, step inside, and find the houses empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of everything. No furniture, no belongings, just bare rooms and darkness and the sound of wind howling through walls that should have been solid. The worst part was what I found in the last room. It was always the same. A mirror on the wall, and in the reflection, I would see myself standing there, but wrong. My face was gray, my eyes were empty, and behind me, filling the doorway, was a figure made of shadow and snow, watching me with something that was not quite eyes. I would wake up gasping, drenched in sweat despite the cold, and every time, I would find snow on my bedroom floor. Fresh snow, in a trail leading from my bed to the door, as if I had been walking in my sleep. The investigators came in March, after the roads were finally cleared enough for outside help to reach us. They interviewed everyone, examined the bodies, read the notes. They said it was a tragedy, a combination of isolation and extreme weather and the breakdown of community support. They said the notes were just the confused writings of people suffering from hypothermia and oxygen deprivation. They said the inconsistencies were explainable, that trauma and fear can make memories unreliable. They did not explain the snow in my bedroom. They did not explain why 17 people had written notes about leaving their homes but died inside without ever opening their doors. They did not explain why some of the bodies were found in positions that suggested they had been trying to get away from something, their hands clawed and bloody from scratching at walls and floors. The town never recovered. People left as soon as the spring thaw made it possible. Families packed up and moved away, leaving houses empty and businesses abandoned. By summer, the population had dropped to less than 100. By the following winter, I was one of maybe 30 people still living in Whitmore. I stayed because I had to know. I stayed because the dreams did not stop, and I needed to understand what had happened during those 23 days. I started going through old records, reading about the history of the town. That was when I found the newspaper articles from 1952. Another blizzard, another 3 weeks of isolation. 28 people dead, all of them found in their homes after the snow melted. Notes left behind that made no sense. Reports of people walking through the storm, appearing at windows and doors, calling for help before vanishing into the white. The same pattern. The exact same pattern. And before that, in 1911, 18 dead. Same storm. Same notes. Same confusion. The articles described it as a curse, back when people still believed in such things. They said the mountain holds something old and patient and hungry. They said it wakes up when the snow gets deep enough, when the town is cut off and alone. They said it walks through the storm, wearing the faces of people, calling you outside, leading you away from safety. And if you let it in, if you listen to its voice, it takes something from you. Not your life, not right away, just pieces, memories, reason, the ability to tell what is real and what is not. I found my own name in the 1952 article. Not me, but someone with my exact name, living at my exact address. He had been the mail carrier too. He survived the storm but left town immediately after, saying he could not explain what he had seen, what he had done. He said he had delivered letters to people who were already dead. He said he had watched himself walking through the storm, a second version of himself made of snow and shadow, going door to door, collecting something from each house. I am leaving tomorrow. I am writing this down because I need someone to know, in case it happens again. The snow is starting to fall tonight, early for November, and the forecast says it will not stop for days. Maybe weeks. The few people left in Whitmore are boarding up their windows, stocking their shelves, preparing to wait it out. But I can hear it already. The voice outside my window, calling my name in a tone that sounds almost like mine. The scratching at the door, soft and patient. The footsteps in the snow, circling my house, getting closer. I know what is out there. I know what it wants. And I know that when the storm ends, they will find my house empty, my belongings untouched, and a note on my kitchen table in my own handwriting, saying I went to help someone who was never really there. The worst part is knowing I will write that note. I will walk out into the storm, and I will not remember any of it until it is far too late. The snow is already piling against my door. I can see my reflection in the window, but it is not quite right. The face is mine, but the eyes are empty, and behind me, barely visible in the glass, is a shape made of shadow and frost. It has been waiting for me. It has always been waiting. And when I open that door, when I step out into the storm, I will become part of it. Another voice calling from the darkness. Another shadow walking through the streets of Whitmore, leading the next person out into the cold. The knocking has started. 3 slow knocks, deliberate and measured. My hand is on the doorknob. I do not remember standing up. I do not remember walking to the door, but I am opening it anyway. I can see the storm beyond, swirling and white and endless. And in the center of it, barely visible through the snow, is a figure that looks exactly like me, reaching out with one frozen hand. I am stepping outside now. The cold does not hurt anymore. Nothing hurts. I am walking into the storm, and behind me, I can hear my front door closing, locking itself. Inside, on my kitchen table, a note is appearing in my handwriting, the ink still wet. It says I went to help someone. It says I will be right back. It is lying. What makes winter truly disturbing is time. Days stretch. Nights blur together. People stop noticing when something feels wrong. Entire towns can become isolated long enough for fear to settle in unnoticed. And once it does, it rarely leaves without taking something with it. Story 7. Man who never left his car. The engine was still running when they found him, exhaust rising into the frozen morning air, headlights cutting through 3 feet of snow that had piled against the windshield. I was working highway patrol in northern Minnesota, covering the stretch of Route 71 that runs from Bemidji up to the Canadian border. It was February, the coldest winter we had seen in 15 years, with temperatures dropping to 30 below and wind chills that could kill you in minutes. Most people stayed off the roads unless they absolutely had to travel. But there were always a few who did not listen, who thought they could make it through the storm. This was different. The call came in at 7 in the morning from a plow driver who had been clearing the northbound lane. He said there was a car pulled off on the shoulder, buried in snow but still running. He had knocked on the window and gotten no response, so he called it in. I was 10 miles south when dispatch radioed me, and I told them I would be there in 15 minutes. The roads were treacherous, ice underneath fresh snow, the kind of conditions that make your vehicle slide even when you were going 20 miles an hour. When I got to the location, I saw the plow truck parked ahead with its flashers on, and behind it, barely visible, was a sedan. Dark blue, 4-door, completely buried except for the roof and part of the driver's side window. The plow driver was standing next to his truck, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. He looked like he had seen something that scared him, and when I got out and asked if he was all right, he just pointed at the car and told me to look for myself. I walked over, my boots crunching through the snow, and cleared off the driver's side window with my glove. The glass was fogged on the inside, but I could see through it well enough. There was a man in the driver's seat. He was sitting upright, hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead through the snow-covered windshield. He was wearing a heavy coat, a knit cap, gloves. His face was pale, almost gray, but his eyes were open. Not blinking, just staring. I knocked on the window. No response. I knocked harder, shouted at him to roll down the window. Nothing. I tried the door handle. Locked. I went around to the passenger side, cleared that window, and saw the same thing. The man had not moved. He was frozen in place like a statue, eyes fixed forward, hands gripping the wheel. I radioed for an ambulance and went back to the driver's side. The exhaust was still pumping out of the tailpipe, which meant the engine had been running long enough to keep the car warm. I could see condensation on the inside of the windows, which meant there was heat. But the man looked dead. I broke the window with my baton. The glass shattered and the cold air rushed in, and that was when I smelled it. Not exhaust, not the usual smell of a car that had been running too long. It smelled like winter, like snow and ice and something else, something rotten underneath, like meat left in a freezer for too long. I reached in and unlocked the door, pulling it open. The man did not move. I touched his shoulder and his body was stiff, rigid, frozen solid despite the heat pouring out of the vents. His skin was ice cold. His eyes were clouded over, frost forming on the surface like he had been left outside in the storm for days. But the engine was running. The heat was on. The car was warm inside. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. I radioed dispatch and told them we had a body, possible exposure, and to get the coroner out here as soon as possible. Then I stepped back and looked at the scene, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The car had been plowed in, which meant it had been sitting here since at least midnight, maybe longer. But the snow around the vehicle was smooth, untouched except for where the plow had pushed it into drifts. There were no footprints leading away from the car. No tracks showing anyone had approached or left. Just the car, buried in snow, engine running, with a dead man inside. I walked around the vehicle, checking for damage, for signs of a crash or mechanical failure. Nothing. The tires were fine. The body was intact. There was no reason for him to have pulled over, and there was no reason for him to have stayed in the car long enough to freeze to death when the heat was working. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, followed by the coroner. They pulled the man out of the car and laid him on a tarp in the snow. And that was when we saw the rest of it. His hands were locked around the steering wheel, not just holding it, locked. His fingers were frozen in place, gripping so hard the knuckles were white and the tendons stood out like cords under the skin. They had to break his fingers to get him out, snapping them one at a time, and even then his hand stayed curled like he was still holding something. His eyes were open, staring, but there was frost inside them. Not on the surface. Inside, like the fluid in his eyeballs had frozen solid. The coroner said he had never seen anything like it. He said the man had been dead for at least 12 hours, maybe longer. But the body was in a state of preservation that did not make sense. Frozen solid, but not from the outside in, from the inside out. We searched the car. Registration said it belonged to a man named David Milner, age 42, address in Fargo. No priors, no warrants, just a regular guy driving north during a blizzard for reasons we could not figure out. His wallet was in the glove box. His phone was on the passenger seat, dead. There was a duffel bag in the trunk with clothes, toiletries, nothing unusual. But there was something in the back seat that made my skin crawl. It was a notebook, spiral-bound, the kind you buy at any drugstore. The pages were filled with handwriting, dense and frantic, the words pressed so hard into the paper they had torn through in places. I flipped through it while the coroner worked, and what I read made me wish I had never opened it. The entry started 3 days before we found him. He wrote about driving north to visit his brother in International Falls, about leaving Fargo in the early afternoon and planning to make it before dark. He wrote about the storm getting worse, about the roads becoming impassable, about pulling over to wait it out. That was the first night. The second entry was written hours later. He said he tried to leave, but the snow was too deep. He said his car was stuck, the wheels spinning, going nowhere. He said he called for help but had no signal. He said he was going to wait until morning and try again. But then the entries started to change. He wrote about seeing something outside the car, a shape in the snow. Tall, dark, moving slowly around the vehicle in circles. He wrote that he locked the doors and kept the engine running, kept the heat on, kept the lights on. He wrote that the shape kept circling, closer each time, until it was right outside his window, standing there, not moving, just watching. He wrote that he could see its face. Not a human face, something else, something wrong. He did not describe it, just said it was looking at him, and that he could not look away. He said his hands were frozen on the wheel, that he could not let go, that something was holding him there, making him stay, making him watch. The entries after that were harder to read. The handwriting got worse, the sentences fragmented, the words overlapping and crossing out each other. He wrote about the cold getting inside him. Not outside, inside. He said he could feel it spreading through his chest, into his lungs, into his heart. He said the shape was still there, still watching, and that it was waiting for something. The last entry was a single sentence, written so hard the pen had torn through the page. It wants me to stay. I closed the notebook and handed it to the coroner. He read through it, his face getting paler with each page, and then he looked at me and said we needed to get the body out of here. He said something was not right, that the scene felt wrong, that we should leave and let someone else handle it. But we could not leave. Not yet, because when we turned back to the car, the engine was still running. I had turned it off. I was sure I had turned it off. I had reached in, twisted the key, pulled it out, and put it in my pocket. But the engine was running, the exhaust pouring into the cold air, the headlights on, cutting through the snow. I checked my pocket. The key was still there. The coroner backed away from the car, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He told me to call for backup, to get someone else out here, to shut the car down and tow it away. I radioed dispatch, but before I could finish, the engine stopped. Not gradually, not like it ran out of gas or stalled. It just stopped. Instant silence. The headlights went out. The heat stopped flowing from the vents, and the temperature inside the car, which had been warm just seconds before, dropped so fast I could see frost forming on the dashboard. We pulled the car out later that day and towed it to the impound lot. The coroner took the body, and I kept the notebook. I read through it again that night, sitting in my patrol car in the lot, trying to make sense of what had happened. David Milner had been in that car for 2 days. The autopsy confirmed it. He died sometime during the second night, frozen solid despite the engine running, despite the heat being on, despite doing everything right to survive. The official cause of death was hypothermia, but the coroner noted that the body showed signs of freezing from the inside out, which was not consistent with exposure. There was no evidence of foul play. No drugs, no alcohol, no injuries, just a man who froze to death in a warm car, his hands locked on the wheel, his eyes open, staring at something no one else could see. But that was not the end of it. 3 weeks later, another car was found in the same spot. Same shoulder, same northbound lane, same position. The plow driver who found it was the same guy who found the first one, and when he radioed it in, his voice was shaking so bad dispatch could barely understand him. I got there 30 minutes later, and the scene was identical. Dark sedan, buried in snow, engine running, driver inside, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead, dead, frozen solid. This time it was a woman, mid-30s, traveling alone. No reason to have pulled over. No mechanical issues, No signs of distress. Just a frozen body in a warm car, with the same clouded eyes, the same frost inside, the same hands locked in place. We found a notebook in her car too. Same kind, spiral bound, same frantic handwriting, same entries about seeing something outside, about the cold getting inside, about not being able to leave. The last entry was the same. It wants me to stay. After that, the highway patrol started avoiding that stretch of road. Calls would come in about stranded vehicles, and dispatch would send someone else, someone who did not know, someone who had not seen what I had seen. But the cars kept appearing, one every few weeks, always in the same spot, always with the engine running, always with the driver frozen inside. The state closed that section of Route 71 2 winters ago. They said it was because of dangerous road conditions, frequent accidents, poor visibility. But I know the real reason. I know what they found in the last car, the one that made them finally shut it down. It was a highway patrol vehicle. My old partner, a guy named Tom who had worked that road for 10 years. He had been missing for 3 days when they found him, sitting in his cruiser, hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield. He had a notebook too, and the last entry was the same as all the others. It wants me to stay. I do not work highway patrol anymore. I transferred south, as far from Route 71 as I could get. But sometimes, late at night, I think about David Milner. I think about that woman. I think about Tom. I think about all the others who pulled over on that stretch of road and never left. And I think about what they saw, because I have started to see it too. It started a few months ago. I was driving home from a late shift, taking back roads to avoid traffic, and I saw something standing on the shoulder. Tall, dark, barely visible in the headlights. I slowed down, thinking it was a person, maybe someone who needed help. But as I got closer, I realized it was not moving. Not standing, just there, waiting. I drove past it, my hands tightening on the wheel, my heart hammering in my chest. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw it turn, slowly, watching my car as I pulled away. I have seen it 3 more times since then. Always on back roads, always at night, always standing just off the shoulder, watching. And each time, I feel the same thing I felt that day on Route 71. The same cold creeping into my chest, the same urge to stop, to pull over, to stay. Last week, I woke up in my car. I do not remember getting in it. I do not remember starting the engine. But I was sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, staring out at the darkness, with the heater running and the headlights on. I was parked on the shoulder of a back road, 20 miles from my house. The engine had been running long enough that the gas tank was nearly empty. And outside, standing just beyond the reach of the headlights, was the shape. Tall, dark, watching. I drove away. I made it home. But I know it is not over, because this morning, I found a notebook in my car, spiral bound, the kind you buy at any drugstore. The first page had my name on it, written in handwriting I did not recognize. And underneath, a single sentence. It wants me to stay. I have not written anything in it. I have not opened it since. But I know it is only a matter of time. I can feel the cold inside me now, spreading through my chest, into my lungs. I can feel my hands tightening on the wheel every time I drive, like something is pulling them there, locking them in place. And I know that one day soon, I will pull over. I will stop on the shoulder of some dark road in the middle of winter. And I will sit there, engine running, headlights on, staring into the darkness while the cold takes over. And when they find me, frozen solid, hands locked on the wheel, they will find the notebook. And the last entry will be the same as all the others. It wants me to stay. Story 8. Night shift at the winter rest stop. The woman in the blue parka had been standing at the vending machines for 20 minutes, and she had not moved once. I noticed her the first time she came in around 11, stamping snow off her boots, shaking ice from her hood. She walked straight to the vending machines near the restrooms and just stood there, staring at the rows of candy bars and chips like she was reading something written on the glass. I figured she was deciding what to buy, maybe waiting for someone. But when I looked up from my paperwork 10 minutes later, she was still there. Same position, same blank stare. Then she turned and walked back outside into the storm without buying anything. I worked the overnight shift at the Route 29 rest stop in northern Maine, right off the interstate about 40 miles south of the Canadian border. It was February, the dead middle of winter, when the temperature drops so low your face goes numb in seconds and the wind cuts through every layer you wear. Most nights were quiet, a few truckers, the occasional lost tourist, sometimes nobody at all for hours. That night, the blizzard had been going since sunset. The weather service called it a whiteout, the kind of storm that closes highways and kills people who get stuck in it. By 10, the parking lot was empty except for my car and a semi that had been there since my shift started. The driver was asleep in the cab. I had not seen him move in hours. The rest stop itself was basic. A single building with restrooms, vending machines, a few benches, and a small office where I sat. My job was simple. Keep the place clean, make sure nothing got vandalized, help anyone who needed directions or had an emergency. Most of the time I just sat at the desk, watched security monitors, and waited for my shift to end at 6 in the morning. But that night felt wrong from the start. The heating system was struggling, making the whole building feel damp and cold despite the thermostat being cranked to 75. The fluorescent lights kept flickering, not enough to go out completely but enough to make shadows jump and twist in the corners. And the wind outside was constant, a low howl that made the windows rattle in their frames. The woman in the blue parka came back at midnight. I watched her on the security monitor as she walked across the parking lot from the tree line, not from a car. She moved slowly through the snow, which was already past her knees, and pushed through the front door with the same mechanical movements as before. She walked to the vending machines. She stood there. She stared. I got up and walked over to her, thinking maybe she needed help or was having some kind of medical episode. When I got close enough to speak, I could see her face clearly. She was maybe 40, pale, with dark circles under her eyes that looked like bruises. Her lips were blue, frostbite blue, and she was not blinking. I asked if she was okay. She did not respond, did not even look at me, just kept staring at the vending machines like I was not there. I reached out to touch her shoulder and she turned and walked away, heading straight back out into the storm. I followed her to the door and watched as she crossed the parking lot, not toward a vehicle but back toward the trees. She walked into the darkness and vanished. I checked the parking lot cameras. There was no car where she had come from. No footprints leading from the tree line to the building. The snow was smooth and untouched except for the tracks she made walking back. But when I rewound the footage to see where she had come from the first time, there was nothing. She just appeared on camera at the edge of the lot, already walking toward the building. At 1 in the morning, a man came in. He was older, maybe 60, wearing a heavy brown coat and a hunting cap with flaps that covered his ears. He walked straight to the restrooms and went inside. I heard the door close, heard the water running, then nothing. After 15 minutes, I knocked and asked if he was all right. No answer. I opened the door, ready to call for help if he had collapsed or had a heart attack. The restroom was empty. All 3 stalls were open. No one inside. The sink was still running, steam rising from the hot water, but the man was gone. I checked every inch of that bathroom. There was no window, no other way out, just 4 walls and a single door that I had been watching the whole time. I shut off the water and went back to my desk, my hands shaking. The cold was worse now, seeping through the walls like the building was not even there. I turned up the thermostat again, but it made no difference. My breath was fogging in front of my face. At 2, the woman in the blue parka came back. Same entrance, same slow walk through the snow from the tree line, same path to the vending machines. I watched her on the monitor and I absolutely knew, that if I went out there and tried to talk to her, she would ignore me and walk back outside. So I stayed at my desk and watched. She stood there for exactly 20 minutes, then turned and left. I checked the recordings. I went back through every hour since my shift started, looking for anyone else who had come in and done something strange. What I found made my skin crawl. The woman had been coming in every hour since 9, 6 times before I noticed her at 11. Same blue parka, same walk, same 20 minutes at the vending machines. And every time, she appeared at the tree line with no explanation. No vehicle, no trail showing where she came from. But she was not the only one. The man in the brown coat had been coming in since 10. Every hour, he would walk to the restroom, go inside, and disappear. 5 times. Same routine, same impossible exit. And there were others. A woman in a red scarf who came in at 1/2 every hour and sat on the same bench for exactly 10 minutes before leaving. A man in a black jacket who walked to the far corner of the building, stood facing the wall, and then walked out. Over and over, all of them appearing from the tree line. All of them leaving no tracks. All of them repeating the same actions like machines stuck in a loop. I called my supervisor. No answer. I tried the state police. The line rang and rang, but no one picked up. My cell phone had no signal, which was not unusual out here. but the landline in the office should have worked. I tried 3 more times. Nothing. At 3 in the morning, they all came at once. I watched on the monitors as figures emerged from the tree line. Dozens of them, maybe more. They walked across the parking lot in a slow, steady stream, all heading toward the building. The woman in the blue parka, the man in the brown coat, the woman in the red scarf, the man in the black jacket, and others I had not seen before. Men, women, different ages, different clothes, but all moving with that same mechanical rhythm. They reached the entrance and came inside. I locked the office door and watched through the small window as they filled the building. None of them spoke. None of them looked at each other. They just went to their spots. The vending machines, the restrooms, the benches, the corners. They stood or sat, performing their routines, silent and blank-faced. I counted 37 people. The building was not big enough for that many. The air should have felt crowded, warm from body heat, but it was colder than ever, so cold I could see ice forming on the inside of the windows. And despite all those people, I could not hear anything. No footsteps, no breathing, just the wind outside and the hum of the vending machines. Then they all stopped. Every single person froze mid-action. The woman at the vending machines, the man walking to the restroom, the woman on the bench. All of them went still at exactly the same moment, like someone had pressed pause on a video. They stood there, completely motionless, for a full minute. Then they turned and looked at the office. 37 faces, 37 pairs of empty eyes, all staring directly at me through the small window. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. They did not move, did not blink, just stared. Then, one by one, they started walking toward the office. I shoved my chair against the door and looked for another way out. There was a small window behind the desk, but it was frozen shut. I grabbed a stapler and smashed at the ice, breaking the seal, and forced the window open. The cold air rushed in, so sharp it felt like knives in my lungs. I climbed through and dropped into the snow outside. The parking lot was empty. No people, no cars, just my vehicle and the semi, both buried under a foot of fresh snow. I ran to my car and fumbled for my keys, my fingers so numb I could barely feel them. I got the door open and climbed inside, locking it immediately. That was when I saw them in the windows of the rest stop. They were standing inside, pressed against the glass, staring out at me. All of them, 37 faces in every window, overlapping, layered on top of each other like photographs stacked too thick. Their breath was not fogging the glass. There was no condensation. They were not breathing. I started the car and drove. The roads were almost impassable, the snow so deep my tires spun and slid. But I did not stop. I drove for 2 hours straight, white-knuckling the wheel, not looking in the rearview mirror, not thinking about what I had seen. When I finally hit a town with lights and people and open stores, I pulled into a gas station and sat there until the sun came up. I called my supervisor again. This time he answered. I told him I quit, effective immediately, and hung up before he could ask why. I did not go back for my last paycheck. I did not want anything to do with that place ever again. But a week later, curiosity got the better of me. I drove back during the day, when the sun was high and the roads were clear. The rest stop looked normal, clean, empty, no sign of damage or disturbance. I parked and went inside, half expecting to see those faces in the windows, but there was nothing. Just a quiet building with humming vending machines and cold tile floors. I went into the office. My replacement was there, a younger guy with headphones in, watching something on his phone. He barely looked up when I walked in. I asked him if anything strange had happened on his shifts. He said no, it was the most boring job he had ever had. I was about to leave when I saw the bulletin board on the wall behind the desk. It was covered in notices and schedules, but tucked in the corner was a piece of paper I had never seen before. It was old, yellowed, with typing so faded I had to squint to read it. It was a list of names, 37 names, and next to each one was a date. The dates ranged from the 1960s to the early 2000s. At the bottom, handwritten in pen, was a single sentence. Lost in the storm. I asked the guy at the desk what it was. He said he did not know. It had been there when he started. Probably just some memorial thing for people who died on the highway during bad weather. But when I looked closer, I recognized one of the names. It was the woman in the blue parka. Her name was printed there, along with a date from 1992. I checked the records later, after I got home. She had been reported missing during a blizzard, last seen at the Route 29 rest stop. Her car was found in the parking lot, engine still running, but she was gone. They never found her. I checked the other names. All of them missing. All of them last seen at that rest stop during winter storms. And all of them vanished without a trace. I moved out of state a month later. I do not drive through Maine anymore. But sometimes, when the snow starts falling and the wind picks up, I think about that night. I think about those faces in the windows. I think about the way they all moved, like they were caught in something they could not escape. Like they were still trying to leave, over and over, but the storm would not let them go. And I wonder if the list is longer now, if there are more names, if someone else working that shift saw what I saw and did not make it out. I wonder if someday, when the next blizzard comes, I will get in my car and start driving without knowing why. If I will find myself back on Route 29, pulling into that parking lot, walking through the snow toward the building. If I will stand at the vending machines and stare at the glass, waiting for something I cannot remember, stuck in a loop I cannot break. I wonder if I'm already on that list. Because 2 weeks ago, I woke up in my car. I was parked on the side of a highway I did not recognize, with snow piled against the doors. My clothes were soaked, my hands were frozen, and on the passenger seat was a receipt from the Route 29 rest stop, time-stamped 3 in the morning. I do not remember going there. I do not remember driving. But the receipt was real. The cold was real. And when I checked my rearview mirror, I saw something that made my blood stop. There were footprints in the snow behind my car. Dozens of them, leading away from my vehicle and disappearing into the tree line. And every single one of them was facing the wrong direction. They were not walking away from my car. They were walking toward it. I have not slept well since then. I keep the doors locked. I avoid highways. I watch the weather obsessively, terrified of the next storm. But I know it does not matter, because the cold is already here. I can feel it in my apartment, even with the heat on. I can see my breath when I wake up in the middle of the night. And sometimes, when it is very quiet, I hear the wind outside my window, howling the way it did that night at the rest stop. And I know, deep down, that I am not done with that place. That the storm is not finished with me. That someday soon, I will get in my car and drive north. And I will pull into that parking lot. And I will walk through the snow to the building. And I will stand at the vending machines, staring at the glass, waiting for something I cannot name. And I will do it again, and again, and again, until someone else working that shift sees me and wonders why I keep coming back. Why I never leave, why I cannot stop. Snow tells stories, even when no one is around to listen. Footprints, empty rest stops, quiet night shifts, they all point to the same truth. In winter, being alone is not always the same as being safe. And some encounters only happen when no one else is watching. Story 9. Radio silence after the snowstorm. I still check the radio every morning, even though I know what I still hear. The storm hit northern Wyoming 3 winters ago, the kind that buries entire towns under 20 feet of snow and turns highways into white graveyards. I was working as a long-haul trucker back then, running freight between Casper and Billings, and I'd been stupid enough to ignore the weather warnings. The money was good, the deadline was tight. I told myself I'd seen worse. I hadn't. The blizzard came down so fast I didn't even see the road disappear. One moment I was watching brake lights ahead of me. The next I was surrounded by a wall of white so thick my headlights couldn't penetrate more than a few feet. I pulled over, or what I thought was over, and within minutes the snow had piled so high against my cab I couldn't see out the windows. The engine kept running. The heater worked. I had food and water in the sleeper. I figured I'd waited out. That first night was just cold and boring. The second night, the radio died. Not just my CB, everything. FM, AM, even the emergency broadcast channels turned to static. My phone had no signal, which wasn't surprising that far out. But when I tried the truck's satellite system, it showed connected with 0 data coming through. The screen just displayed a loading symbol that never stopped spinning. I checked my watch. 9:47. I remember that because I kept looking at it, expecting time to move faster, but the minutes felt stretched and wrong. The silence was the worst part. People don't realize how much noise surrounds them until it's gone. No wind howling, no distant traffic, no humming power lines. The storm had created a sound vacuum so complete I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I tried the CB again, cycling through channels, listening to empty static that somehow felt thick and heavy, like something was pressing against the speakers from the other side. Then, On channel 19, I heard breathing. Not my breathing, someone else's, slow and deliberate, like whoever it was had been waiting for me to find them. I grabbed the handset. Hello, this is westbound trucker near mile marker 214. Can anyone hear me? The breathing stopped. I waited, counting seconds, my hand cramping around the handset. The static returned. That awful dense nothing. And I was about to switch channels when a voice came through. It was male, I think, though distorted and crackling like it was traveling through damaged equipment. The voice said a name. Martin Kowalski. That was it. Just the name. Flat and emotionless. Then more static. I didn't know any Martin Kowalski. I tried responding, asking if they needed help, asking for their location, but got nothing back. After 20 minutes, I gave up and tried to sleep, though the cold was seeping through the cab walls despite the heater running full blast. On the third day, I realized I hadn't seen another vehicle in over 60 hours. The storm had ended sometime during the night. I could tell because weak gray light was filtering through the snow packed against my windows. I spent 2 hours digging out the driver, his side door with a tire iron in my hands, my fingers going numb even through work gloves. When I finally cleared enough to push it open, I stood on the running board and looked out at what had been Interstate 90. The highway was gone, not buried, gone. There were no signs, no guardrails, no indication that a road had ever existed. Just an endless field of white stretching in every direction, perfectly flat except for a few gentle rises that might have been hills or vehicles. The sky was the same dead gray as the snow, making it impossible to tell where land ended and air began. I couldn't see the sun. I couldn't tell which direction was east. I got back in the truck and tried the radio. Channel 19 was still active, still that same thick static. But now when I listened closely, I could hear something underneath it. A rhythm, maybe, or a pattern. I sat there for an hour, my ear pressed to the speaker, trying to make sense of it. The cold inside the cab was getting worse even with the engine running. My breath came out in clouds. Ice was forming on the inside of the windshield. It's when I heard the second name, Rebecca Torrance. Same flat delivery, same crackling distortion. This time I checked my phone to record it, but the screen was black and wouldn't turn on despite showing full battery before. I tried 3 more times to get a response on the CB, then switched to channel 9, the emergency frequency. More static, more breathing, and then a third name, David Chen. I wrote them down in the logbook I kept in the sleeper. Martin Kowalski, Rebecca Torrance, David Chen. They meant nothing to me. I told myself it was some kind of automated system, maybe a search and rescue broadcast listing missing persons from the storm. That made sense. That was logical. But it didn't to explain why the names came through on trucking channels instead of emergency frequencies. It didn't to explain the breathing between transmissions. On the 4th day, I tried to walk out. I made it maybe 200 yards before I had to turn back. The snow was too deep, the cold too severe, and every direction looked exactly the same. There were no landmarks, no distant mountains, nothing to navigate by. I brought a compass, but the needle spun lazily without settling on any direction. My tracks behind me were already filling in with fresh snow, even though the sky was clear. When I got back to the truck, the radio was transmitting. I could hear it through the closed door, that distinctive crackle of an active CB, and for a moment pure relief flooded through me. Someone had responded. Help was coming. I yanked the door open and climbed inside, grabbing the handset. The voice was saying my name, Thomas Hendricks, Thomas Hendricks, Thomas Hendricks, over and over, that same flat tone, no emotion, no inflection. I dropped the handset like it had burned me. It swung on its coiled cord, bouncing against the dash, and the voice kept coming through the speaker. My name, my full name, which I hadn't given to anyone on the radio. I turned the CB off. The voice continued, Thomas Hendricks, Thomas Hendricks. I pulled the power cable, ripped it right out of the back of the unit. The voice didn't stop. It wasn't coming from the CB anymore. I realized it was coming from everywhere. The speakers, the vents, the metal walls of the cab itself, all vibrating with that awful flat repetition of my name. I ran, didn't to grab supplies, didn't to think about direction, just threw myself out into the snow and ran until my legs gave out. When I finally stopped, gasping and shaking, I couldn't see the truck anymore. Couldn't see anything, just white and gray and that terrible flat light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. The silence had returned, I stood there in snow up to my thighs, watching my breath crystallize in the air, and realized I couldn't feel my fingers or toes anymore. The cold was inside me now, settling into my chest, making each breath sharp and painful. I had maybe an hour before hypothermia killed me. Maybe less. That's when I heard the radio. Not from any device, not from any speaker. It was just there in the air around me, that familiar static, and underneath it the voice reading names. Dozens of them now, hundreds maybe, all in that same flat tone. Some I recognized from news reports about the storm. Others were unfamiliar. The list went on, and I stood there listening because I couldn't move anymore. My legs had stopped working. The cold had won. The names stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard breathing again, closer this time, all around me. And I understood with absolute clarity that whatever was out there in the white, whatever had been speaking through the radio, was not trying to rescue anyone. It was taking attendance. I don't remember getting back to the truck. I woke up inside the sleeper, my clothes soaked through, my body shaking so hard I thought my bones would break. The engine was still running. The heater was on. According to my watch, 6 hours had passed. The CB was working again, power cable intact, like I had never touched it. I didn't turn it on. On the 5th day, another truck found me. A snowplow crew had been clearing the interstate and spotted my rig buried in a ditch about 40 yards off the highway. They said I was lucky to be alive. They said the storm had killed 17 people across 3 states. They asked why I hadn't used my CB to call for help. I told them it was broken. They checked it later, at the station where they took me to warm up and file a report. The CB worked perfectly. Every channel clear, every function operational. They seemed confused about why I just sat there for 5 days without calling anyone. I didn't know how to explain. Didn't know how to tell them about the names, about the voice, about the breathing and the static. I went home to my apartment in Billings and quit trucking the same week. But I kept the CB. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that I imagined it, that the cold had made me hallucinate. I set it up in my living room, connected to a proper antenna, and every few weeks I turn it on and scan through the channels. Nothing unusual, just normal traffic, truckers and travelers, occasional emergency broadcasts. Normal. Then winter came around again. I was flipping through channels one night in December when I hit that same thick static on channel 19. My apartment was warm. I was safe, but I felt that cold creep back into my chest anyway. I almost turned it off. Almost. The breathing started. And then the names. Martin Kowalski, Rebecca Torrance, David Chen. The same ones from a year ago, in the same order, and I realized with creeping horror that they weren't to search and rescue announcements. They weren't the missing persons reports. They were something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with helping people find their way home. I looked up the names that night. Martin Kowalski died in the storm, found frozen in his car 3 miles from the highway. Rebecca Torrance was a truck stop waitress who left work during the blizzard and never made it home. David Chen was a college student driving back to campus. All dead. All found weeks after the storm ended, buried under snow in places they shouldn't have been. The list kept going. I counted 73 names that first night before I couldn't listen anymore. I looked up as many as I could. Every single one had died in winter storms across Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas over the past 15 years. Not just the recent blizzard, all of them, scattered across different years, different storms, but always in that same corridor of highway through the northern plains. And now the radio was reading their names like a roster, like someone was checking to make sure they were all still there. I tried different radios after that, bought a new CB, tried an old ham radio setup, even used the emergency weather radio that came with my apartment. Didn't matter. When winter came, when the temperature dropped and the snow started falling, I defined that frequency. That static, those names. This year, the list has gotten longer. I counted over 200 names last week. Some from storms I remember, others from before I was born. The voice reads them every night now, starting at sunset and continuing until dawn. I tried to record it, but the recordings always come out silent, just dead air where the voice should be. I try to tell people, but they look at me like I'm crazy or grief-stricken or suffering from delayed trauma. Maybe I am, but last week I heard something new. The list has always been in chronological order, oldest deaths first, reading forward through the years. But last week, after reading the last name from this winter, the storms, the voice didn't stop. It kept going. Started reading new names. Names that when I looked them up weren't dead yet. They were just missing. 6 people have disappeared in Wyoming and Montana in the past month. Hikers, travelers, people who went out in the cold and didn't come back. Search parties are still looking. Their families still have hope. But they heard their names on the radio, read in that same flat tone, added to the list with everyone else. And 2 nights ago, the voice read a name that made my blood stop. Sarah Hendricks, my sister, lives in Missoula. She is fine. I called her yesterday and she answered, annoyed that I'd woken her up so early but otherwise perfectly normal. She has no plans to travel. She is staying home all winter. She is safe, but her name was on the list. I keep the radio on now, all the time, listening to that static. The breathing has gotten louder, more frequent, and underneath it I can hear something else, something that might be wind or might be voices. Hard to tell. The temperature in my apartment keeps dropping even though the heat is on full blast. Ice forms on the windows every night. I check the list compulsively now, listening for new names, dreading what I'll hear. Last night the voice read 70 new names. 70 people who are still alive, still going about their lives, with no idea they on a list being read by something that lives in the static between frequencies. Something that exists in the white space between the road and nowhere. In the cold gaps where radio signals break down and people disappear. Sarah called me this morning. She said she is thinking about driving to Billings next week to visit. She said the road should be clear by then. The storm they predicting one to be that bad. She said she misses me. I told her not to come. I told her to stay home, to stay warm, to stay off the highways all winter. She laughed and said I was being paranoid. Said she is driven through worse. We argued. She hung up angry. She is going to come anyway. I know she is. Her name is on the list. I thought about destroying the radio, throwing it away, smashing it to pieces. But I know it wouldn't matter. The voice doesn't need the radio. The radio just lets me hear what is already out there, what has always been out there in the cold white spaces between towns. Breaking the receiver stop the transmission. It's snowing again tonight. I am watching the forecast, watching the storm system move across Wyoming toward Montana, watching it blanket the highways in white. The radio is reading names. The breathing is getting closer. And somewhere out there in the dark and cold, something is taking attendance, checking its list, making sure everyone it is called for eventually answers. Sarah's name was read again 5 minutes ago. I don't know how to stop it's coming. I don't know how to warn people who want to believe me. All I can do is sit here in my freezing apartment, listening to that voice read names into the static, waiting to hear if any new ones are added. Waiting to hear if mine comes back. The list is never finished. That's what terrifies me most. It just keeps growing, adding more names every winter, claiming more people who made the mistake of being alone on the wrong road during the wrong storm. And once your name is on the list, once it's been read out loud into that static, I think something marks you, claims you, waits for its chance. I can hear the breathing right now, even with the radio off. It's in the walls, in the heating vents, in the space between one heartbeat and the next. And I know, with the absolute certainty of someone who is already dead but hasn't stopped moving yet, that when this winter ends, my name will be on a different kind of list. The kind they publish in newspapers. The kind that starts with the words, found frozen, and ends with cause of death unknown. But I answered when something called my name through the static. Just like everyone else who made the mistake of listening too long to the silence between stations, to the cold, empty frequencies where the dead wait for the living to join them on the list. The radio just turned itself on. It is reading names again. And this time, I recognize every single one. Story 10. Room with the iced over window. The ice on the inside of the window was an inch thick, and I could see my own face frozen in it, staring back at me with eyes I did not recognize. I was working demolition on the old Ridgemont Hotel in upstate New York, a place that had been closed since the early 90s. The building sat on the edge of Lake Champlain, 5 stories of rotting wood and broken windows, surrounded by pine forests so thick you could walk 20 feet in and lose sight of the road. The city wanted it torn down before it collapsed on its own, and our crew had 3 weeks to strip it clean before the heavy equipment moved in. It was January, cold enough that the lake had frozen solid and the wind off the water went straight through your coat like you were not wearing anything at all. We worked in shifts, breaking down walls, pulling out copper wire, hauling decades of trash to the dumpsters outside. Most of the hotel was what you would expect from a place that had been abandoned for 30 years. Mold, water damage, furniture left behind and ruined. But the fourth floor was different. The fourth floor was freezing. Not just cold, freezing. The kind of cold that makes your teeth ache and turns your breath into clouds so thick you could barely see through them. The rest of the building was cold too, sure, but the fourth floor felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer. Our breath would fog, our tools would frost over, and no matter how many layers we wore, the cold would sink into your bones within minutes. The heating system had been shut off for decades. There was no power to the building, no running water, no explanation for why one floor would be colder than the others. But it was, and after the first day up there, half the crew refused to go back. They said it felt wrong, like the air itself was trying to push them out. I stayed because I needed the money, and because I was curious. Room 412 was at the end of the hallway, last door on the left. It was the only room on the fourth floor with the door closed. Every other room was open, some with doors hanging off the hinges, some with no doors at all. But 412 was shut tight. The wood swollen and warped like it had been sealed that way for years. I tried the handle on my second day. It would not turn. I put my shoulder into it, and the door would not budge. One of the other guys, a man named Pete who had been doing demo work for 20 years, told me to leave it. He said some rooms were better left alone, and the look on his face when he said it made me think he was not joking. But on the fifth day, I went back with a crowbar. The door splintered when I pried it open. The wood so rotted it came apart in chunks. The smell that came out was wrong. Not decay, not mold. It smelled like winter, like snow and ice and something else I could not name. Something that made the back of my throat tighten. The room inside was small. A single bed against the far wall, stripped to the mattress. A dresser with all the drawers missing. A chair knocked over on its side. And the window. The window was covered in ice. Thick, white, opaque ice that coated the glass from edge to edge, bulging inward like it had been applied from the inside. I walked closer, my boots crunching on the thin layer of frost that covered the floor, and reached out to touch it. The ice was cold enough to burn. I pulled my hand back and stared at the window, trying to make sense of it. The building had no heat. It was January, but ice does not form on the inside of windows unless there is warm air hitting cold glass, and there was no warm air in this building. There was no air movement at all. Just that suffocating, unnatural cold that seemed to radiate from the walls themselves. I looked closer and realized the ice was not smooth. There were patterns in it. Shapes, like something had been pressed against the glass from the inside, leaving impressions. I could see what looked like handprints. Dozens of them, overlapping. Fingers spread wide, palms flat. And in the center, where the ice was thickest, there was a face. Not a reflection. A face frozen into the ice itself, mouth open, eyes wide, staring out at the room. I backed away and left the room, pulling the broken door shut behind me. I did not tell anyone what I had seen. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a pattern in the frost that my mind turned into something it was not. But that night, lying in my motel room 20 miles away, I could not stop thinking about it. I went back the next day. The door was open. Not just cracked, fully open, swinging slightly on its hinges like someone had just walked through. I knew I had closed it. I remembered pulling it shut, hearing the wood scrape against the frame. But now it was open, and the cold pouring out of that room was so intense I could feel it from 10 feet away. I stepped inside and looked at the window. The ice was thicker, the handprints were clearer, and the face in the center was different. It was not staring at the room anymore. It was staring at the doorway. At me. I walked closer, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But I had to know. I had to see if it was real. The face was frozen in an expression of terror, mouth stretched wide like it was screaming, eyes bulging. And the longer I stared, the more details I could see. The lines around the eyes, the texture of the skin, the individual strands of hair pressed against the ice. It looked real. It looked like someone had been frozen alive and trapped inside the glass. I reached out to touch it, and the ice moved. Not melted, moved. The surface rippled like water, and the face shifted, turning slightly, the eyes tracking toward my hand. I stumbled back, my heart hammering, and the ice went still again. But I had seen it. I knew I had seen it. I left the room and went downstairs to find Pete. He was in the lobby, pulling apart a section of wall. And when I told him what I had seen, he stopped working and looked at me with an expression I could not read. He asked if I had touched the window. I said no. He told me not to go back to that room. He said the last crew that worked this building, back in '03 when the city first considered demolition, had a guy go missing. They found him 3 days later in room 412, frozen solid, sitting in the chair with his eyes open, staring at the window. The coroner said it was hypothermia, but Pete knew the guy. He said there was no way he froze to death in 3 days, not with the gear they were wearing, not with the rest of the crew checking every room twice a day. He said the guy looked like he had been frozen for weeks, months, even. His skin was gray, his eyes were clouded over, and he was covered in frost, like he had been left in a freezer. The project was shut down after that. The building was sealed, and the city decided it was not worth the risk. But now, 12 years later, they were trying again. And Pete said if I had any sense, I would stay away from the 4th floor. I did not listen. That night, I went back alone. I told myself I needed proof. I brought a camera, a flashlight, a thermos of coffee to keep warm. I climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, my breath fogging in the beam of my flashlight, and walked down the hallway to room 412. The door was closed again. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The cold hit me like a wall, so intense my lungs seized and I had to force myself to breathe. The ice on the window had spread. It was crawling across the walls now, thin and crystalline, branching out like veins. The handprints were everywhere, hundreds of them, and the face in the center was larger, clearer, pressed so close to the glass it looked like it was trying to break through. I raised the camera and took a picture. The flash lit up the room for a split second, and in that moment, I saw something move in the ice. A shadow, a shape, something behind the glass, shifting and writhing like it was alive. I took another picture. The flash fired, and this time, I saw it clearly. There were people in the ice, not just one face, dozens, pressed against the glass, layered on top of each other, their mouths open, their hands reaching out. They were frozen mid-scream, eyes wide, expressions twisted in terror. And they were all looking at me. I dropped the camera and ran. I made it to the stairs before I heard the sound. It was coming from behind me, from the 4th floor. A low, grinding noise, like ice cracking under pressure. I looked back and saw frost spreading across the hallway floor, racing toward me, covering the walls, the ceiling, everything. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. I ran down the stairs, my boots slipping on the ice that was forming beneath my feet. I hit the lobby and kept running, bursting through the front door into the night. The cold followed me. I could feel it on my back, creeping down my neck, wrapping around my chest. I got to my truck and started the engine, cranking the heat as high as it would go. I sat there for 20 minutes, shaking, waiting for the warmth to come back into my hands. When I finally looked up at the building, I saw the 4th floor windows. Every single one was covered in ice, thick, white, opaque, and in each window, pressed against the glass, were faces. Dozens of them, staring down at me. I left. I did not go back. I called my supervisor the next morning and quit. I told him I was sick, that I could not finish the job. He did not argue. He said 2 other guys had quit overnight, and the rest of the crew was refusing to go past the 3rd floor. The project was shut down again 3 days later. The city decided the building was too dangerous and brought in a wrecking ball instead. I watched the demolition on the news. They tore the building down in less than a week, reducing it to rubble and dust. But when they got to the 4th floor, the wrecking ball stopped. The operator said the building would not come down. The walls on the 4th floor were frozen solid, the ice so thick the ball just bounced off. They had to bring in cutting torches to melt through it, and even then, it took hours. When they finally broke through, they found something in room 412. The window was still intact, still covered in ice, and inside the ice, pressed against the glass, was a body. A man, frozen solid, his hand reaching out like he was trying to escape. The coroner said he had been dead for at least 12 years. They identified him as the worker who went missing in '03. But that was not the disturbing part. The disturbing part was that he was not alone. Behind him, layered in the ice, were more bodies, 17 in total, men and women, different ages, different eras. Some of them were wearing clothes from the 70s, some from the 50s. One was in a dress from the 20s. They were all frozen in the same position, hands pressed against the glass, mouths open, eyes wide. The news called it a freak accident, a cold spot in the building that had somehow preserved the bodies for decades. But I knew better. I had seen the faces move. I had seen the ice spread. I had felt the cold following me, trying to pull me back. I moved out of New York a month later. I do not do demolition work anymore. I do not go near abandoned buildings. And I do not talk about what I saw in room 412, because no one would believe me. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up freezing. My apartment will be warm, the heat running, but I can see my breath in the air. I will get up and check the windows, and sometimes, just sometimes, I will see frost forming on the inside of the glass. Thin at first, just a few crystals, but if I watch long enough, the frost will spread, and patterns will start to form. Handprints. They appear slowly, one at a time, pressed against the glass from the inside. Small hands, large hands, hands with long fingers and hands with short, blunt nails. And if I look close enough, if I let myself stare too long, I can see faces starting to form in the ice. Mouths open, eyes wide, staring back at me. I will turn on every light in the apartment. I will crank the heat until it is unbearable. And slowly, over the course of an hour, the frost will melt. The handprints will fade, the faces will disappear, but they always come back. And I know, deep down, that it is only a matter of time before the ice stops melting. Before the cold becomes too strong to fight, before I wake up one morning and find myself staring at a window covered in frost, my own hand pressed against the glass, my mouth open in a scream no one will hear. Because I have started to dream about room 412. I see it every night now. The same room, the same window, the same faces pressed against the ice, staring at me with eyes that know something I do not. And in the dreams, I am walking toward the window. I am reaching out to touch it, and the ice is moving, rippling, opening up like a mouth. And I can feel the cold pulling me in. Last week, I woke up on my kitchen floor. I do not remember getting out of bed. I do not remember walking there. But when I opened my eyes, I was lying on the tile, shivering, my skin blue, my fingers numb. The thermometer on the wall said it was 72 degrees, but I was freezing, and on the window above the sink, there were handprints. Not on the outside, on the inside, dozens of them, overlapping, pressed so hard into the glass it looked like the window was going to shatter. I have stopped sleeping. I keep the lights on. I keep moving, because I know if I stay still too long, the cold will find me. It is always there, just at the edge of my awareness, waiting for me to let my guard down. And I know it is only a matter of time, because 2 days ago, I looked in the mirror and saw frost forming on my reflection. Just a thin layer, starting at the edges, creeping inward. And for just a second, I saw someone else staring back at me. A face I did not recognize. A face frozen in terror. I do not know how much longer I have. I do not know when the ice will finally take me. But I know it is coming. I can feel it in my chest, in my lungs, in the way my hands shake even when the room is warm. And I know that when it does, when I finally freeze and the cold takes over, I will be just another face in the ice. Just another handprint on the glass. Just another person staring out from room 412, screaming at anyone who gets too close, trying to warn them before it is too late. But no one will listen. They never do.